This year, everyone's favorite operatic Japanese crime series hits the high seas in Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, where longtime foil and anti-hero Goro Majima takes center stage as the main protagonist, and get this, now he's a pirate. Weird, right? What's next, a Yakuza game where everyone's a samurai? Or there's a zombie outbreak in Tokyo? Actually, they already did that. These games have always been pretty goofy in the margins, but Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii is definitely the hardest the series has jerked the wheel, or maybe the tiller, in such an overtly silly direction. That said, Yakuza is by no means the first major game franchise to get weird like this, so let's take a look at 6 video game spin-offs, expansions, and reimaginings that sounded weird, stupid, unnecessary, or otherwise made us say what the f***, but which totally pulled it off. Making a video game with zombies is not a new concept, nor is it a particularly unusual one, but taking an existing video game series and suddenly throwing zombies into the mix, well, that's a little bit different, especially in a serious military shooter like Call of Duty. Compared to some of the wacky things that have made their way into COD in the last decade, Zombies mode has become almost mundane. These days, you can hop into Warzone, equip your Crash Bandicoot submachine gun, and compete in Squid Game against Skeletor, Nicki Minaj, and a 1/10 scale RX-78 Gundam. With all that going on, it's easy to forget that this series began as the most intense World War II shooter on the market. In 2007, the original Modern Warfare brought Call of Duty into the present day and was a massive success across the board. It would have been a tough act to follow no matter what, but after players had gotten a feel for its high-tech 21st century ordnance, the antiquated arsenal of 2008's World at War might have seemed like a downgrade. Plus, it was the 4th Call of Duty in 5 years to take place during World War II, so developer Treyarch was probably staring down the barrel of a gun to find a way to breathe new life into the experience. And what better way to keep things fresh than with hordes of rotting corpses? After completing World at War's single-player campaign, players were surprised with a horde mode in which they fought off endless waves of, well, Nazi zombies as the mode became colloquially known. Officially titled Nacht Der Untoten, German for Night of the Living Dead, this was more of an Easter egg than a full-fledged multiplayer mode, but it hooked players nonetheless. When word got out that a fleshed-out version would be included in Treyarch's 2010 follow-up, Call of Duty Black Ops, hordes of fans were ready to sink their teeth into it. Are zombies in a video game inherently weird? No, but bear in mind, Call of Duty got its start as a spiritual successor to Medal of Honor, which in turn, Steven Spielberg had created in the wake of Saving Private Ryan's success. If we got a sequel to Saving Private Ryan, or a second season of Band of Brothers, and a bunch of zombies showed up in a post-credits scene, you can bet that a few people might say something along the lines of, "What the f***?"
But as we all know with the undead, they keep coming unless you shoot them in the head.
In the late aughts and early teens, zombies were infecting all avenues of popular culture, and though not all the zombifications of existing game franchises that had followed Call of Duty's lead are worth mentioning, Red Dead Redemption's Undead Nightmare expansion definitely is.
Survive if you can.
Oddly enough, despite the inherently B-movie subject matter, Undead Nightmare played it pretty straight, continuing the main game's shift from the bawdiness of the PS2-era GTA games towards something a bit more subdued. A zombie spin-off of a mostly serious cowboy game is a notch or two down from Call of Duty Zombies on the what the f*** scale, but compared to the larger Rockstar Games library, it sticks out like a decomposing thumb.
And all I gotta do is act naturally.
Rockstar's flagship open-world games aren't exactly realistic, but they're all rooted in reality, and a zombie outbreak complete with undead wildlife is definitely the most fantastical thing we've ever seen from the studio. Grand Theft Auto V's single-player campaign featured little green spacemen and its main characters turning into animals, but that could be chalked up to the worst weed and best peyote Los Santos had to offer. GTA Online is another story and hasn't been afraid to get silly, including adding zombies, but goofy seasonal content in a long-running live service game isn't quite the same as a standalone expansion that fully commits to the bit. And oh yeah, Undead Nightmare was a standalone experience, which kinda made us say what the f*** in a good way. Players who already own the game could snag it digitally for just $10, which is half of what GTA 4's expansions had cost, and for anybody who didn't want a regular cowboy game but was suddenly interested when zombies got involved, a standalone physical version came out for $30. For a 7 to 10 hour AAA open-world cowboy game, that is a rootin' tootin' steal. Keep in mind, just a few years earlier, Bethesda had charged $2 for a set of horse armor. You wanna know the biggest reason to say what the f*** about Undead Nightmare? It's the last time a Rockstar game got single-player DLC of any kind whatsoever. Maybe that'll change with GTA 6, but don't hold your breath. In this age of games as a service and season passes for offline DLC, the idea of a standalone expansion / spinoff that costs less than a 2-topping pizza is pretty crazy, but you want to know the definition of insanity? Developing a standalone expansion / spinoff that's so absurd it sounds like an April Fool's joke, and then announcing it on April Fool's Day, and then actually releasing it less than a month later. And that's exactly what happened with Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon.
But it's not a question of whether my friends will survive.
While Far Cry 3's visuals up the saturation from its dusty earth tone malaria-infected predecessor, its picturesque tropical setting was diametrically juxtaposed with its narrative tone. Players took on the role of Jason Brody to wage a one-man war, murdering countless pirates and stopping along the way to slaughter an entire ZooBook subscription worth of endangered wildlife to craft various weapon holsters and ammo pouches, to further facilitate the murdering of pirates. If there's another way for a guy to carry 30 arrows on his person without skinning 2 bears, 2 pigs, and a goat, I would like to hear it. But until then, animal murder. Okay, so Far Cry 3 was kinda over the top to begin with, but much like a bull shark hit with an explosive arrow, its first DLC would blow it out of the water.
He's on a desperate mission to bring down a battalion of ruthless killer cyborgs and save the world.
On April 1st, 2013, just a few months after Far Cry 3 was initially released, Ubisoft put up a website and a grainy VHS quality teaser for something called Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, which featured a neon and desert chrome logo against a vaporwave laser grid, some Terminator-grade synth music, and the goofy tagline, "The year is 2007, it is the future."
Sergeant Rex Colt is leading the battle between good and evil.
Well-adjusted people had a nice chuckle, and some boring people left pissy comments about hating April Fool's Day, and it was mostly written off as a joke. At least until an Australian classification board filing gave it an R18+ rating for containing high-impact sex scenes, which seemed like sort of a long way to go for just an April Fool's joke. People started wondering, maybe this thing is real?
Let's show them how cyber commandos get it done. Mark 4 style, little.
Well, as you probably figured out by now, it was real. If Red Dead Redemption had an undead nightmare, Far Cry 3 got a direct-to-video fever dream. Released digitally for just $15, this was another standalone spin-off that put a surprising spin on the main game. Blood Dragon had players take on the role of Sergeant Rex Power Colt, a wisecracking Mark IV cyber commando.
Let's show them how cyber commandos get it done.
The mission? Well, pretty much the same stuff that Jason Brody did, but instead of pirates, he was murdering the cyborg forces of his former commanding officer, and instead of slaughtering regular sharks, crocodiles, and cassowaries for crafting components, he hunted down cyber sharks, robo-crocs, and mutated cassowaries.
I've always wanted a cousin.
While it was on a much smaller scale than Far Cry 3 and featured some streamlined, simplified systems, Blood Dragon also added some new ones, like the ability to lure the titular sanguine reptiles by throwing down a bunch of cyborg hearts as bait, a mechanic that would be featured much more prominently in Far Cry 4 and subsequent installments. So yeah, Blood Dragon was an asset flip, but art direction and hilarious writing can go a long way toward making something recycled feel new. Oh, and one more thing it had going for it is that it arrived before Ubisoft's open world formula had completely worn out its welcome. While Far Cry's 4, Primal, 5, New Dawn, and 6 all had their own unique flavor and introduced new features, they never deviated too far from the formula introduced by 3. They ventured into the Neolithic past, a post-apocalyptic future, had plenty of psychedelic drug trips, and got some kooky DLC involving Yetis, Martians, the Viet Cong, and yes, some zombies, but they never got quite as distinctively or ambitiously weird as Blood Dragon did. In most cases, video games kick things up a notch by adding zombies, but how do you do that to a game that's already chock full of The Walking Dead? Well, how about kicking things down a notch by turning an action-packed arcade game about killing zombies by shooting them in the head with a light gun to an action-packed arcade game about typing rapidly on a keyboard? If the pen is mightier than the sword, then who's to say a QWERTY keyboard doesn't pack more punch than a Glock 17? Released in 2000, Sega's Typing of the Dead took the trappings of House of the Dead, but swapped the headshots for home rows, showing up in Japanese arcades with a standard keyboard in place of a light gun. Players were forced to type words as quickly as possible to shoot zombies, making it probably the most violent educational game since the Oregon Trail. It'd be impossible to prove it one way or the other, but I have a hunch that this is one of the rare cases in which an arcade game has gotten easier for the average player over time. Not so much because anything changed within the game itself, but because the general public's familiarity with a keyboard has increased dramatically in the last 25 years. Typing of the Dead got several console ports, often as a pack-in with a USB keyboard, and it also got some creative spin-offs of its own. English of the Dead was released exclusively in Japan for the Nintendo DS with a focus on learning words rather than just typing them, and an iOS port titled Flick of the Dead made use of touchscreen gestures, but it lost some of the educational charm that made typing stand out in the first place. Mobile phones have had games on them almost as long as they've been around. Modern hardware has gotten so powerful that it can now handle full-size ports of AAA console experiences, but for a very long time, when a popular game got a mobile version, it would generally come at the expense of everything that made anyone care about the original, especially in the pre-smartphone era, even when developed for devices that were designed with gamers in mind. Looking at you, N-Gage. Porting Doom to flip phones in the early aughts might have been doable. At that point, it had been ported to the Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance, two relatively underpowered pieces of hardware compared to the PCs that the game was developed for. In 2005, cell phones had begun showing signs that they might be a viable gaming platform. John Carmack, the lead programmer of Doom and pioneer of modern game design and also part-time rocket scientist, probably could have gotten the game running on a flip phone if he'd put his mind to it. But rather than just port the FPS as is, he gave us the Doom RPG, as in the role-playing game. Doom already had a rocket launcher. Doom RPG still looked like Doom, and it still involved shooting from a first-person perspective, but it was turn-based. This made it less reliant on a high frame rate or quick button presses, which was a pretty smart move for mobile phones. In Doom RPG, you play as a Space Marine, and the game confirms you're actually the same Space Marine who appears in Doom, Doom 2, and Doom 3, which throws a bit of a monkey wrench into the chronology for anybody who's actually keeping track. Some enemies from an earlier Carmack game made an appearance, and Wolfenstein 3D's National Socialist German Shepherds showed up on Mars as demonic hellhounds. Later in the game, the player could use a dog collar to catch them and sick them on enemies or use them as a canine shield. Speaking of teaching old dogs new tricks, in recent years the Doom modding community has gotten the original game running on an increasingly impressive number of totally ridiculous devices, including car stereos, a cotton candy machine, a pregnancy test, and even inside other software like Minecraft or an Excel spreadsheet, or even the Google search bar. Unsurprisingly, these folks were also able to figure out how to port the old flip phone RPG onto PC. Porting a beloved shooter onto devices not designed to run games, let alone Doom, is a technical accomplishment of its own, but successfully reinterpreting an action-heavy experience is something a bit more calculated and stats-based, borders on alchemy, and yet Doom is not the only game to pull it off. Halo Wars and Gears Tactics both turned shooters into strategy games, shifting the player's perspective and making them rely on their wits more than just their reflexes. Amazingly, they pulled it off and found an audience in spite of basically being the video game equivalent of McDonald's attempts to sell pizza. One of the fundamental selling points of a shooter is the thrill of pushing a button to, shoot stuff. In strategy games, tactical or real-time, it feels more like you're asking someone else to shoot things for you. This isn't to say the strategy games aren't gratifying, it's just that the gratification is much less instant. But still, anybody mature enough to play a hit M-rated shooter can muster the patience to figure out a strategic spin-off of it. It's not like trying to make a tactics game based on something for kids like Mario. Oh wait, they did that? A Mario game that swaps platforming for tactical strategy, or a Mario game where he fights Rabbids, or a Mario game where Mario has a gun would all sound relatively out there on their own, but somehow Ubisoft convinced Nintendo that a combination of all three was a good idea, and even more shockingly, it worked. In classic Ubisoft fashion, Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle leaked before its official E3 reveal, and considering that an entire marketing deck full of key art leaked, there was little doubt it was legit, but there was plenty of skepticism it would be any good. Mario is the most iconic and beloved video game character, period. Meanwhile, even the most hardcore fans of Rabbids will admit that they're not quite in the same league as Mario, assuming that hardcore fans of Ubisoft's proto-minions do in fact exist beyond the Guillemot household. In any case, Mario and Rabbids both have similar family-friendly, all-ages appeal, so a colorful minigame collection where they cross paths would have made a lot of sense, or perhaps a kart racer, or a platformer, but Nintendo already has Mario Party, Mario Kart, and countless Mario platformers, 2D and 3D alike, which sell just fine without Rabbids infesting them. So instead, Ubisoft and Nintendo gave us something brand new, a tactics game where Mario shoots Rabbids with a gun.
These are a little bit different from the weapons you see in Ghost Recon.
But really, if you think about it, it's not the weirdest thing Mario's done. He's supposedly a plumber, but he also has a doctorate, and sometimes he runs a power washing business or teaches typing. In his spare time, he parties, he golfs, he races go-karts, plays tennis, goes missing, occasionally fights a gorilla, or competes against a hedgehog in the Olympics. And like many habitual mushroom enjoyers, he has been a traveler of both time and space. Not every one of Mario's roles has been a hit, but it's Nintendo's willingness to let its poster child try new things that's made him such an enduring figure. Over the years, Nintendo has given us, among other things, a love tester, an alarm clock that watches children sleep, a cardboard piano, fishing rod, VR headset, and mech suit, a Zelda spin-off in which a lonely 35-year-old man gets trapped in Tingle's body and must learn how to talk to women to escape this fresh hell, and a Princess Peach game which ends, not to put too fine a point on it, with a joke about the player's mom being happier because she got a vibrating personal massager. Look it up, I didn't make that, someone else did. None of these are exactly beloved, iconic, fan favorite, or even necessarily successful Nintendo products, but they're a testament to the company's willingness to try new things. It says a lot about how accustomed gamers are to Nintendo trying wacky stuff that the possibility of a Mario Tactics game with guns and Rabbids was never in question, just whether or not it would be any good. On the other hand, a fairly comprehensive description of the premise and features of Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii actually leaked on a message board months before it was announced, but it sounded so stupid that nobody took it seriously. And sure enough, it's real, and you shouldn't take it seriously because it's ridiculous, but it's still fun. Modern video games are under a lot of scrutiny from every angle, and a lot gets called into question. Their cultural significance in an increasingly legitimate entertainment medium, their commercial viability in a brutally competitive market, how they're utilizing cutting-edge technology against staggering development costs, and everything in between. But at the end of the day, video games are supposed to be fun, and fun doesn't necessarily make sense. So when a completely bonkers idea comes along, maybe the big question shouldn't be, what the f, but why the f not? What's your favorite game that wasn't afraid to color outside the lines, and what game series needs to loosen up and get a little weird? Let me know in the comments, and for everything gaming related, silly, serious, or otherwise, you are already in the right place, IGN.